The topic of week 1 is planning for effective feedback and assessment. Before we start thinking about providing feedback for online students, we will spend some time planning why and how students in our online courses will be assessed, and how those assessments align with our course and assignment outcomes. The key takeaway for week 1 is this: feedback and assessment begins long before an instructor opens a student paper to start putting comments in the margins. Feedback and assessment is a process that begins when instructors define course learning outcomes and begin to map out the kinds of assignments they will teach in the course. Now, why is this? What do learning outcomes at the course level have to do with feedback on an individual paper? Well, think about it. When you have to write something or complete a task, do you like to know why you are doing it? Do you need a sense of purpose and context? Of course. Students learn much the same way we do. They are much more likely to produce good writing if they understand why they are given a particular assignment, how that assignment ties into the things they are supposed to learn in the course, and ideally how the assignment ties into skills they might need in their workplace or life later. If your assignment is clear about these connections and explicit about the skills and knowledge students are expected to be working on, you are far more likely to get writing from students that has some clarity and focus. We talk a lot about the concept of alignment in these OWI courses. You're probably familiar with that term if you've taken 73, 71, or 2, or one of the practicums. I mean, we use that word a lot. The idea is that you want to explicitly align and make connections from your course learning outcomes to your learning outcomes at the unit level, to the assignment level outcomes, and on through all the way to the rubric that you use as a framework to evaluate and respond to student work. Now, I have found in my own teaching that challenging myself to do this well has really improved the clarity of the assignments I write and the quality of the work students deliver in response to my assignments. Aligning course outcomes with assignment instructions and writing clear and effective assignments is one of those things that is simple in theory and really hard in practice. Most of you will probably revise the language and organization of your major assignment for this course at least 2 or 3 times. That kind of iterative process is built into the design of this course, and I hope that you will adopt that approach for the assignments that you write later as well. So in week 1, we're going to introduce our first 3 weekly learning outcomes for this course, and they're right here on our week 1 course page. So the first one says, design problem-centered, clear, and direct assignments that align with course outcomes and are reflected in course rubrics and other assessment tools. The second one says, design learning opportunities that explicitly model practices and use tools for online composing and revising. And the third one says, design useful and clear rubrics. Explain them to students and use them to guide formative and summative assessment. So the first of these is what we have just been talking about. You will start practicing this principle right away as you work on activity 1.2, which is to compose an assignment that your student, a peer in this class, will complete. Now, the second outcome gets into the details of designing a good assignment. The key words here are explicitly model. Learning opportunities that explicitly model practices and use tools for online composing and revising. So what does that mean? That means we want to design and write assignments that are explicit about the steps in the process and the tools students are expected to use. Most writing teachers find it hard to identify the complexity in their assignments because they already know how to do it, right? A classic example is the rhetorical analysis assignment, which is one of the most common writing assignments in Comp 1 courses. Writing teachers know how to analyze text, and they have been doing it for a long time. It just seems obvious to us. To students, many of whom are probably not great readers to begin with, the idea of analyzing a text in detail is almost like nuclear physics would be for us. Where do we even start? So the idea behind this outcome is that we need to write assignments and provide learning opportunities that help students break down a complex task, like analyzing a text, into manageable steps and to model that process very deliberately. The third outcome for this week is all about rubrics. Most of you are probably familiar with the concept of rubrics, and if you have tried to write one before, you know that they can take some time. Rubrics are useful because they focus your attention and your students' attention. When you design clear rubrics and explain them to students, you help them understand the context and purpose of an assignment. When you use a rubric to guide your assignment and assessment later, you have a framework that helps you as an instructor to focus on the important things and not to get bogged down in correcting sentence level errors. Unless, of course, you are actually teaching an assignment about editing sentence level errors, right? That's generally not where you should be focusing most of your attention. So the rubric directs you to these higher order concerns that we're going to be talking about a lot in this class. So all three of these learning outcomes for week 1 are pretty darn important principles that are really anchors of this whole course, and we'll come back to them again and again throughout the course. It obviously takes more than 1 week to learn how to do some of these things. So that's a little bit of an overview of the kind of key ideas and key questions that we're exploring. So let's talk about the actual work that you'll be doing this week. So here we are on the course webpage. You can see the overview video will go right here. This is the video I'm recording right now, so it's not here yet. So Project 1.1 is a discussion board post with an attached document, that the purpose of which is to introduce yourself and to do a little bit of self-assessment. So you can read through the questions here. Basically, this is your chance to introduce yourself to me and to the class. I know some of you, but not all of you. You know some of each other, but not all of others. So, some of you know each other, some of you don't. So it's your chance to introduce yourself and kind of get a reading on where you are in the program and where you are in your own learning. So the tool that you will be using to do this is this Learning Grid template. Some of you have seen the Learning Grid before. I have actually simplified it this time. Blow this up for you a little bit. This is a way of looking at the course learning goals for this course as a whole and reflecting on where you are. So you can see across the top there are 3 columns with our primary principles: accessibility, presence and interaction, and course design. And then the course learning outcomes affiliated with each one follow below that. So there are the 5 learning outcomes, 5 learning outcomes under accessibility. I won't read these to you now, but please do read them carefully as you're working on this project. So read through the learning outcomes for the course first, and then below here, I've simplified this grid. It used to have like 6 or 7 rows, and it was just a little bit too much. So I simplified it to 3: knowledge, experience, and personal learning goals. So under each of these 3 areas, accessibility, presence, interaction, and course design, follow the directions in blue, and then replace the blue text with your own and fill in each of these 9 cells. So for example, under knowledge and accessibility, it says review the learning goals above. What do you know today about accessibility? Think about the language and the principles above and describe your current level of knowledge and expertise with those terms. Just be honest. Even if you're like, I'm just getting started, I've barely introduced to this concept, that's fair. So first, talk about what you know, your knowledge about accessibility, presence, interaction, and course design based on these, and then your experience. Basically, where did you learn that knowledge? As a student, as a teacher, in your graduate program, maybe you're taking another degree at another school, maybe you have background in courses in education or instructional design or whatever, but basically what experiences have you had that have taught you something about accessibility, presence, interaction, and course design. And then finally, and probably the most important piece, is this last row. What do you want to learn in this course? It's really a short learning curve, 7 weeks, so you can't expect the moon. So I suggest that you consider focusing on 1 or 2 of the principles above as a primary focus and a personal goal. Again, we're only going to touch on each of these goals, but maybe you would decide that you really want to focus on this one: practice using available and accessible technologies for conferencing. Obviously, we're going to be doing some of that synchronous live video conferencing, so that might be a goal. So pick 1 or 2 of these that you particularly want to focus on in the next 7 weeks and just describe what your focus is and what you want to learn. And then at the end of the semester, at the end of the course, you can come back and assess yourself in terms of the progress you'd made toward those personal learning goals. So this is a way to kind of level set. And some of you have much more experience both in our program and in teaching than others, and that's totally cool. So if you're at square 1, maybe you want to get to square 2. If you're already at square 7, maybe you want to get to square 8. So identify some of those personal learning goals, and I will work with you then to focus the work that you're doing on those goals and help provide feedback to you about that. So then you take your completed grid and post that along with your discussion on the discussion forum for 1.1. So that's a little bit about Project 1.1. And then 1.2 is the meaty project for this week. 1.2 is the first draft of the actual online writing assignment that you will be working on for 7 weeks with a partner. So you will have a partner who will serve as your student, who will actually write the assignment that you give them. So it needs to be something that can actually be done by a peer in this course. It can't be something that would require 8 weeks of research and field work. You can't do an archaeological dig in Egypt unless you happen to be living in Egypt. But be realistic about what can be accomplished. Follow these guidelines. Here, there's a lot of information about this. I may well produce another video to explain more details about this assignment. Some of you already have writing assignments that you have developed in other courses, or you're actually teaching. That's totally cool. In fact, that's better. If you have a live assignment that you're really using in one way, shape, or form, feel free to make use of it again here. You don't have to start from scratch. If you are starting from scratch and are new to teaching, there's a bunch of resources. There's a template that you can use, some samples, some learning outcomes from 2 different colleges, as well as learning outcomes from WPA. So if you're really just kind of diving into the world of first year comp, take a look at those resources. Most of you have assignments that you developed in 73, 71, or 2, or are using in your courses, and you can use that here. Just again, be sure it's something that could realistically be completed by a peer. And then as you're thinking about this, really before you make your final decision about what you want to use for this, be sure to read through this major project description. This explains the project that we'll be working on. So it explains the assignment sequence is multi-layered, your feedback sequence is multi-layered, it has some definitions of terms, it explains the roles, and then there's this handy chart here that explains week to week what you're doing. Each of you will be playing 3 roles. You'll be an instructor working with a student, you'll be a student working with an instructor, and then you'll be a peer working on the discussion boards together to reflect on what you're learning in your peer instructor dyad project. So each week you can see what you do for each of these roles. So this little chart is actually a pretty good way to look at the course as a whole and see how the 7 weeks are organized. And you can see Dr. Harris and I have worked to really kind of develop this in a way that's sort of like a very intensive writing workshop, where at the end of the 7 weeks, you come back with a revised final assignment and some reflection on what you learned as a result of getting feedback and watching your student complete that assignment for you. So do read through that. And then here's the rubric that we will be using at the end of the course to assess your work. So you can see how I've organized this around content design, grammar mechanics, and user-centered design. And you can see the relative point totals show you the relative importance of those criteria. So for example, content assignment outcomes are aligned with practices and assessment. There's that word alignment. Again, that's worth 5 points. So this kind of shows you the key things that I think are important in the way this project ties into the major learning goals for this course. A little bit of meta reflection there. Okay, so that's project 1.2. Again, that's due over the weekend so that you have time to share it with your peer and so they can start to get up to speed with what's being expected of them. So that's assignment 1.2. That's the big one for the week. And then these last 2 are fairly straightforward activities that basically just involve doing some administrative work to schedule your synchronous conference with a classmate. This will be happening in week 2. And then to actually formally invite your student to a video conference. This is where the role-playing game aspect of this course begins. So read through these directions here. Again, these are just emails that you send by Monday of next week. So read through those instructions. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, the best way to get my attention, and if you need a response quickly, is via email at msgreer@ualr.edu. And that's a preview of week 1. We've got a lot to do. We're kind of jumping in the deep end. So let's get started.